All right. I think we can go ahead and start. Let me.
Can you just tell me a little bit about who's here?
Sorry, Dr. Salah?
Can you tell me a little bit about who's attending? You have, it looks like 63 people on, I know Bella's here, and
Yes.
but on your end, who do you have?
Yes, we have our rector, we have our vice rector, we have our dean. We have like 3 deans and 5 dean in here, and we have
Wonderful.
head of research and community development, and some of chair of center of study center. We have 16, and we have lecturers and students. So
Great.
all right, great. Okay.
Thank you for coming.
Why don't we go ahead and start?
Okay.
Okay. Greetings and welcome to our second webinar, a collaboration program between UIN STS Jambi and Michigan State University. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
First of all, I would like to welcome Professor Hassan Salah, the Director of Global Studies and Professor at English Department at MSU. Welcome. And thank you so much. I know it's already late in the evening and you already spend your time to be together with us to share your study about a topic that you are going to present. And also welcome to our rector, Professor ID. And also we have some dean here. Dean, Vice Dean, Dr. Abdul Malik, and also Dean Dr. Iskandar, Dean Dr. Halima Jafar, and also Head of Research and Community Development Program, Dr. Aib Mursalin, and also Dean of FST, Science and Technology, Dr. Iskandar. So welcome, and also lecturers and students. Thank you so much for joining our second webinar. To begin, let me introduce you to Dr. Isabella Tirtawalio. Dr. Tirtawalio is our own Indonesian who work at MSU. She is an assistant director of Asian Studies Center at MSU, and she got his PhD from Michigan State University. So let's welcome Dr. Tirtawalio.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dion Ginanto, and all who are here this morning. Good morning, salam sejahtera. Yang saya hormati Prof. Dr. Salah Asyari, Director of UIN STS Jambi. Good morning, all. Dean Dr. Iskandar, Dean Dr. Halima Jafar, Vice Dean Dr. Abdul Malik, Dr. Ayub Mursalin, all lecturers and students. It is such an honor for us to continue this partnership and this virtual exchange. I want to acknowledge also my esteemed colleague from Michigan State University from the Asian Studies Center, Jennifer Wargo. Hi, Jen, who has been also part of this collaboration with Dr. Ginanto in holding this virtual exchange, and hopefully we can continue on and expand our program and collaboration. Thank you, Dr. Salah Hassan, who is joining us tonight and will be sharing a talk, an exciting talk. We're very happy that you're able to join this series. I'd like to, first of all, I think just welcome Professor Dr. Salah Asyari to do a welcoming remark. A little bit of a short bio. Professor Dr. Salah Asyari holds a PhD in Indonesian Islamic and Political Studies from the University of Melbourne in Australia. And while at the University of Melbourne, he worked with academic supervisors, Professor Merle Calvin Ricklefs, Professor Abdullah Said, and Professor Arif Budiman. He has another doctoral degree in Islamic civilization from the State Islamic University, UIN Syarif Hidayatullah, Jakarta, and worked with advisors Dr. Asyumardi Asra and Professor Dr. H. Sweeto. He holds a master's degree in Islamic studies from McGill University in Canada and a bachelor's degree from UIN Jambi in religious studies. I welcome Professor Dr. Salah D and to welcome us in this happy event. Silakan Pak Rektor.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. First of all, thank you very much for such a very wonderful introduction by Professor Bella. And good morning, Professor Salah Hassan. Assalamualaikum. And Professor Jennifer Wargo.
Welcome, salam.
And also, Assalamualaikum to all the deans of a number of faculties who are joining this second program, or our joint program between Michigan State University and UIN Sultan Toha Jambi. First of all, that I am very happy, I'm very proud actually that to have this second webinar, and it appears to me now that we are really working on this, and for those of you from UIN Sultan Toha Jambi, as you can see that we a little bit different from what we used to do. We start from MOU, signing MOU and doing nothing, and we do a lot of things now, and after that we are going to sign MOU. It's very good, and this is very important learning that we can learn from these programs. And we've been waiting for this very promising programs in order for UIN Sultan Toha Jambi to work internationally. And second of all, that I would like to restate again our commitment to build partnerships, especially with Global Studies Program at SU. And I would like to tell you a little bit that we here at the UIN Sultan Toha Jambi, right now we have 16 Center of Studies, and we are going to introduce some more Center of Studies in order to follow the way how international universities build collaborations, and in order also to follow the way how we can be accounted in global rankings. Right now we are now under two international rankings, like UI Grammatrix, and right now we are submitting our second documents for the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, Times Higher Education Impact Ranking. And we do hope that by the end of this year, we are able to submit these documents. And for my own, what I talk for the next, I think, next month or a couple of weeks to come, Professor Salahuddin, I would like to talk about the Indonesian Islam and what they are challenging right now, particularly dealing with nationalism. And I hope that I can contribute this to this program, and also I do hope that the way that I'm going to present this will help my friends here at the UIN Sultan Toha Jambi to broaden their mind and to suit the way how we conduct this kind of program. And without further ado, then I think we are very happy now. We are going to have Professor Salah Hassan, and I do hope one day Professor Bella, Professor Jennifer, and Salah Hassan will join us here in Jambi. And I think when the coronavirus pandemic gone, then we do hope that we are going to see you here in Jambi. And I make that plan, actually. I make that plan that to enable us to see directly, particularly for these programs. Thank you very much. Let's we open this program by reciting Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Bella. Back to you.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Professor Dr. Salah D, for that warm welcome. So I will now introduce our esteemed speaker from MSU. Dr. Ginanto, if we can have the short bio so that we can share it with the group. Professor Dr. Salah Hassan is the director for the Global Studies in the Arts and Humanities at Michigan State University and an associate professor in the Department of English. He also serves as a core faculty for the Muslim Studies program at MSU and is affiliated with my center, the Asian Studies Center. His areas of research and teaching include post-colonial literature and theory, mid-20th century anti-colonial intellectual movements, literatures of empire, and Arab and Muslim North American studies. His research projects have recently been oriented around the representation of Arabs and Muslims in the media, and also projects of Arab and Muslim self-representation, which is the title of the presentation today. He is the founder of the Muslim Subjects website. He has also co-produced the short documentary film, Death of an Imam, the link to which you have in the PowerPoint, and please feel free to disseminate further, Dr. Ginanto, and the feature documentary, Migrations of Islam. The link is also available on the PowerPoint. And I believe Professor Salah Hassan is also currently completing a book manuscript tentatively titled Arabs / America, Essays on Race, Representation, and Resistance. The title of Professor Salah Hassan's talk today is Muslim Presence, Paradoxes of Muslim American Self-Representation. And I would warmly welcome now Professor Salah Hassan to share your talk. Thank you very much.
Oh, I am so honored to be able to present my paper to this group. And I would love to come to Jambi and be with you at some point in the future. And I want to thank all of you, Dion and Dr. Soaidi and Bella and Jen and my colleague, Professor Mohammed Khalil, who made all of this possible. So I'm very honored, and I hope you don't mind. I'm going to read a paper, but I do have a PowerPoint that I would like to share with you. It's mostly images. If I am reading too fast and you're having a hard time following, please let me know and I'll try to slow down. I will read slowly, so it might be a little long. It's not an extremely long paper, but it's best if I read it just so that, okay. You can see that?
Yes.
Okay. Can you hear me all right? Everybody good? All right.
Yes.
There has been a dynamic emergence over the last decade of Arab Americans and American Muslims of all ethnicities in the cultural sphere, as is evident by the growing number of Arab and Muslim stand-up comedians, musicians, actors, filmmakers, and writers. Confident displays of Muslimness in the United States, for instance, in the ever-rising number of new mosques, or the many Muslim women who wear hijab, or the mainstreaming of halal foods, are more public than ever before. One of the fundamental themes of the current anti-Muslim and anti-Arab discourse is the claim that the culture of Muslims and Arabs often collapsed into the same undifferentiated racial formation is necessarily antithetical to Americanness. A June 2014, sorry, this is a little bit dated, a June 2014 Zogby poll of American attitudes towards Arabs and Muslims found that between 2010, so these are examples of the presence of Muslims. Sorry, I got a little behind there. Found that between 2010 and 2014, there has been a continued erosion, in other words, a decrease in the favorable ratings given to both communities, to both Arabs and Muslims. posing a threat to the rights of Arab Americans and American Muslims. Favorable attitudes toward Arab Americans and Muslim Americans have declined from 43%. So they were already negative. They were 43% of the population saw Arabs and Muslims as in a favorable way, but it has gone down now to 32% for Arabs and from 35% to 27% for Muslims. So this is long after, more than 10 years after 9/11, and it continues to go down even still. So on this slide, you can see one of the issues is that Americans do not trust Muslims. They don't see them as being loyal to the United States. And so when there is a polling of the how people think about Muslims, do you think each of the following applies or does not apply to Muslims living in the country? Muslims living in this country are loyal to this country. In the United States, do you have confidence in each of the following or not? How about the military or judicial system in courts? So would you want Muslims in the military? Would you want them to be judges or prosecutors? Do you trust their role in elections, like to be part of the election process? That they reporting in the media that Muslims will be honest and these kinds of things. And you can see that it's hard to see read this here, the text here, but it's the light one is Muslims are not loyal and Muslims are loyal to the US. So in some cases, there are some instances where it's thought to be that Muslims would be loyal, but generally speaking, there's like this kind of sense that there is no confidence in Muslims. So here you can see again, like American attitudes toward Islam, and these kind of polling numbers that show kind of a decrease in the confidence over time. And these were done by at the Brookings. And so this is very, there's a majority of Americans in the period between 2011 and 2015 saw Muslims in a less favorable light. And we can talk a little bit more about why this is, but this is right on the eve, of course, of the election of Donald Trump. So the poll also shows that a growing percent of Americans say that they lack confidence in the ability of individuals from either community, Arab or Muslim, to perform their duties as Americans should they be appointed to an important government position. So the language of the results of the poll indicate a correlation between the generalized antipathy, in other words, the dislike toward Muslims and Arabs, and a widespread willingness to limit or violate their civil rights. In other words, this growing distrust of Muslims and dislike of Muslims in the United States and Arabs as well is linked to a popular view that it's okay to violate their civil rights in ways that it wouldn't be okay with other groups. So Pam Gellers' American Freedom Defense Initiative ads on public transportation. This is Pam Geller, the American Freedom Defense Initiative. Her ads on public transportation in New York City and San Francisco have been one of the most controversial anti-Muslim provocations. One ad stridently calls on Americans to oppose Islam. In any war between the civilized man and the savage, support the civilized man, defend America, defeat Jihad. So these were put on buses in New York City and in San Francisco. Here, Jihad operates synecdochally, apart, standing in for the whole of Islam. So they take Jihad and they say, well, this is what Islam is, like the idea of holy war. This is the way they define Jihad, some kind of militant, violent thing. It's taken as the whole of Islam, which is by allusion defined as a kind of savagery. Echoing in the 21st century, a central idea of 19th century imperialism, Geller's ad crudely equates Islam with savageness. The current public hostility towards Muslims existed in the decades before September 11, 2001, but was often associated with Arabs, especially Palestinians and Iranians. In the current context, anti-Muslim politics have taken on a particularly virulent an unnuanced tone that positions Muslims as an ideological wedge issue. So in the United States, in elections, they have these things called wedge issues, sort of like, the thing that divides the public. So people have a stand, for example, on capital punishment. They're either for or against. People have a stand on abortion. They're either for or against. And then people have a stand now on Muslims. They're either for or against. So it's become, or immigrants, they're either for or against. So these are these wedge issues that divide very often, and they kind of line up. So typically people who are, for capital punishment, against abortion, are anti-Muslim and opposed to immigrants. So this is sort of the Donald Trump position, more or less. So in the current context, anti-Muslim politics have taken on a particularly virulent and unnuanced tone that positions Muslims as an ideological wedge issue. Gellers' ads and other public insults to Islam inflame hostility towards Muslim American assertions of their religious, cultural, or political values in US public life, and as an integral part of Americanness, which explains the odd spectacle of Terry Jones, the odd spectacle of Terry Jones burning a Quran. But anti-Muslim politics operate as a cover for domestic political alignments that can be viewed as the extreme right-wing edge of existing US foreign policy. So one has to think about, what I'm trying to say here is one has to think about anti-Muslimness in the United States is linked to US foreign policy in the Middle East, to some degree in Asia, to some degree in Africa, and even certain alliances with Europe. And so it's not just about what's happening at home, it's also about what's happening overseas. From the perspective of Muslims in the US, however, Gellers' ads are a form of hate speech. The words are an act of violence directed at a group, Muslims, Arabs, Middle Easterners, and aim to intimidate its members, to make them feel unwelcome, to undermine their sense of belonging. In the period since 2008, there has been a proliferation of political organizations led by ideologically conservative pundits or media personalities, such as Frank Gaffney. So this is Frank Gaffney at the Center for Security Policy, or Robert Spencer at Jihad Watch, and Bridget Gabriel at Act for America. So here's Gaffney. They have elaborated the position that Muslims and Arabs in the US constitute the major threat to domestic national security. These political organizations, which claim expertise in US national security, Islamic terrorism, and Middle East foreign affairs, they think they're like academics. They act like they're scholars. They take the authority, and some of them actually have PhDs or higher degrees of some sort. But they're serving a particular ideological cause. So they promote these policies restricting the freedoms of Muslims in the US, and this is where the Muslim ban comes from under Donald Trump, arguing that draconian measures are justifiable and necessary to prevent a Muslim takeover of the United States, what sometimes is called stealth jihad. Stealth as in like covert, undercover, that kind of thing. Unseen, but secretly operating. Quoting an interview with Frank Gaffney at his offices of the Center for Security Policy, Jonathan Kay, who's a journalist, explains the scope of this American anti-Muslim conspiratorial culture. So this is what Kay says. Gaffney ticked off a list of foreign policy decisions he disagreed with. This is during Obama's period, and cited them as evidence for what he's previously called an obvious and worrying pattern of official US submission to Islam. That the United States is submitted to Islam, and that the theopolitical legal program of the latter's authority called Sharia. In other words, what he's suggesting, there's about 3.5 million Muslims. There's probably more than 3.5 million Muslims in the United States, but let's say that's the official number. That what Gaffney's saying is that these Muslims are taking over the United States, and that there's something to be worried about here. And so that justifies violating their civil rights, because they will distort the US's character. organizations like Gaffney's Center for Security Policy, working in cohort with Jihad Watch, Act for America, that's another Jihad Watch is an organization, Act for America, and others, all of which are identified by the Southern Poverty Law Center as part of an anti-Muslim inner circle, have recklessly promoted reductive ideas about Middle Eastern regional politics and Islamic religious beliefs, at the center of which are conspiracies about a Muslim assault on the US. So let me just break that down a little bit for you, just so you know. So the Southern Poverty Law Center is a watchdog organization that focuses on racism primarily in the United States and looks at white supremacist, racist organizations, fascist organizations, skinhead organizations. So this is what they mostly look at. But what they've noticed is that these groups, these anti-Muslim groups, are equally racist. So this is in the United States. And the Southern Poverty Law Center, which looks at discrimination and racism across the board and intolerance, it has documented these groups as being Islamophobic in a virulent kind of way that is not unlike the racism that we see with white supremacists when it comes to the way they act towards Muslims. So part of a broad conservative strategy, these groups have political linkages to anti-Muslim zealots in the Republican Party. So these are not politicians, these are just people out there, and they're influencing political leaders, particularly people who are kind of part of the mainstream on many other issues, but on Islam tend to be very hostile. So Peter King would be one of them, Michelle Bachmann, and then right-wing Christians headed by the likes of Pat Robertson or Jerry Falwell or the Quran-burning Terry Jones. So these are evangelical Christians for the most part who have large congregations, often have television shows, multiple churches, and they're very profitable. They make a lot of money from collecting donations and that kind of thing. So these churches, along with these think tank people, influence Republican political decision making when it comes to Muslims. And what's interesting about this, many of these anti-Muslim organizations also are ardent defenders of Israel, which is positioned as a frontline state in the battle against Islamic terrorism, as is evident, for example, so these are some of the groups that, we see, these sort of anti-Muslim groups that the Southern Poverty Law Center has considered to be racist. Act for America, Because They Hate Us, Bridget Gabriel. And then here is David Horowitz. So Horowitz here in his Freedom Center. So I'll return to the Horowitz Freedom Center and the linkage between anti-Muslim politics and attacks on Palestine solidarity advocacy in a moment. So these groups, they reduce the complexity of regional politics, whether in connection with Iraq, Iran, or Israel, or Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, or Hamas, to a singular view of political Islam, which produces an ideologically effective, if erroneous, in other words, it's effective but wrong, conflation of all things Muslim and Arab, or things Muslim and Iranian. So that Hamas, Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, they're all the same, no differentiation. And even if we don't like them, even if we think that they're all violent and do not represent us as Muslims or Arabs, they need to be understood as not part of the same thing. They're not all representative of Islam in any way. At the center of the discourse is a rather blunt assertion that Islam, often associated with a variety of Middle Eastern political figures, is inherently a religion of terror, aspiring to global domination. Since the Arab Spring of 2011, the political landscape in the region has become even more complex, as instability and regional wars undermine the potential of producing functioning states in the Middle East. For example, the fall of regimes witnessed the rise to power of Islamic political parties, notably in Egypt, first with the election and then the overthrow of the Muslim Brotherhood. The civil war in Syria and the constant crisis in Iraq contributed to the rise of Islamic State in 2014. So these historically significant events across the Arab region, from North Africa to the Persian Gulf, had little impact on the anti-Muslim discourse in the US, which has merely incorporated ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood into its rhetoric. So this is a quote from so every jihadist act in America. This is a quote. Every jihadist act in America in recent memory can be linked to a Muslim Brotherhood organization which radicalized, prepared, or supported jihadis. So this idea that, that the Muslim Brotherhood is somehow operating in the United States through mosques or networks, secret networks, and it represents a threat, is mobilizing a particular mindset in the United States. The rise of Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and its particularly violent seizure of Mosul and the surrounding area in summer of 2014, have provided yet another opportunity to claim that all forms of Islam pose an inherent threat to the US and worldwide peace. These positions can be tracked certainly back to pre-9/11 anti-Arab and anti-Iranian political positions, which now are being rescripted into policy statements partly inspired by Israel's approach to regional conflict. So in an editorial titled Netanyahu's ISIS Moral Clarity, published by David Horowitz, this gentleman here. So David Horowitz, Netanyahu's ISIS Moral Clarity, the Freedom Center, he writes, whatever name they go by, whether it is ISIS, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, or the Islamic Republic of Iran, that supports some of these groups and others, they all represent an indivisible threat to global peace, security, and individual liberties. They are, in short, part of the common enemy. So it doesn't matter where they are. It doesn't matter, what they're sectarian, whether they're Shia or Sunni. It doesn't matter whether they're Arab or Iranian, whether they're Middle Eastern or North African. If they're part of this, these movements, they're all the same. And if it's coming out of Islam, it must be Islam that makes this happen. So in the interest of representing a global threat, Klein, one of the earlier ones I talked about, effaces the many contextual and tactical differences between the groups, differences that are especially evident, for example, in the contrast between Hamas and Boko Haram, or Al-Shabaab and Hezbollah. But perhaps more important is the invocation of Netanyahu's policies toward the Palestinians as a model for US foreign policy. And you can see here that it's this alliance between Europe, America, and Israel that is, the idea that Israel is at the center of this. So this is the Horowitz Freedom Center that produced this poster. And so they're putting Israel at the center and the United States and Europe on the margins. But the whole idea is that Islam is an assault to civilization, and these are the representatives of civilization. So this is kind of revealing because the question is, this rhetorical move is connected to the Horowitz Center attack on Palestinian human rights advocates, especially those calling for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, as is evident in the center's poster campaign. So we can see like these posters that they did, they're very artistic, very creative, and very effective. You can see like they're very clever in their graphic design features. And so we can see here, This is the flow. Okay, so Hamas is a terrorist organization. It has an impact on American Muslims for Palestine, and then American Muslims for Palestine have an impact on Students for Justice in Palestine. So any Palestinian advocacy then, from their perspective, gets traced back to terrorism. And they're especially focusing here on what's happening on American university campuses. So in many cases in the United States, if you're a member of Students for Justice in Palestine, you're not an Arab and you're not a Muslim. These are just young people who care about human rights and justice, and they see the Palestinian situation as terrible. And, you know, and some of them are Jewish. Some of the Students for Justice in Palestine, on our campus, we have a student group called Students United for Palestinian Rights, and the leader of the group is a Jewish girl student who is anti-Zionist. So the battleground has become these student organizations and the university campuses, especially around BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So by connecting BDS to Hamas and more broadly to terrorism, the Horowitz Center seeks to mobilize American hostility towards Palestinians and defense of Israel at a time when US public opinion has begun increasingly to question the US-Israel special relationship. At a time when many Americans have begun to question whether or not the United States should continue to give military aid to Israel, unconditional military aid to Israel. So the Horowitz Center poster campaign exposes one of the specific ideological operations of anti-Muslim politics in the present moment. Its ideological operation is to shore up support for Israel. It's not simply that Muslims are terrorists, it's that we can use this as a way to mobilize continuing support for Israel, because there's nobody after 9/11 who's going to say, you know, that like Muslims aren't in some way responsible for some violent acts. And the Palestinians in the past, before 9/11, were often accused of terrorism, but now it's the Muslims who are being accused of terrorism. So the Horowitz Center poster campaign, okay. So the Horowitz Center poster campaign exposes one of the specific ideological operations of anti-Muslim politics in the present moment. Similarly, during the election campaign, Trump deployed anti-Muslim politics as a wedge issue, playing on public fear and hostility towards Muslim. And it's transparently obvious now, his anti-Muslim and anti-Arab executive orders, like his anti-immigrant policies, mostly directed at Mexicans and Latin Americans, aimed at further militarization of the US-Mexico border, are oriented towards externalizing domestic problems, such as public awareness of the growing income gap, police violence against people of color, and the defunding of public schools or misguided public policies, such as tax cuts for the wealthy and increased military spending. So the point I'm trying to make there is that when Trump starts to campaign and he uses the anti-Muslim discourse as a part of his campaign, he's trying, like, he knows that people out there are anti-Muslim. You can see it in the polls, that there's a growing number of Americans over the years that are increasingly anti-Muslim. So he uses that as a way to mobilize people. He doesn't really care about Muslims one way or the other. He probably doesn't like them, doesn't like us. He just would rather we didn't exist. But the reason why it's important is because it gets him voted in. It's a thing that mobilizes support for him. And he was responsible, of course, for inciting people against Obama, claiming that Obama was not American, that Obama was a Muslim, and these kinds of things. And so this is part of, like, one of the ways to mobilize the anti-Muslim discourse in support of his own election. So playing off the insecurity of white Christian Americans, Trump's most high-profile policies have taken aim at Mexicans and Muslims. Easy scapegoats because of the cultural challenges that their presence represent to Anglo-Christian white supremacy in the US. With some noteworthy exceptions, mainstream news reporting on the Middle East and Muslims in the US provides a less extreme version of the anti-Muslim propaganda, but has a far greater capacity to influence US public opinion. So here's the thing I'm trying to say here is that Trump represented an extreme version of this these anti-Muslim positions. But the media was also doing that, also promoting some of these, but in a kind of milder, more reasonable fashion. And that's changed a little bit, and we could talk a little bit about how that changed after I'm done. So even if it's difficult to assess precisely the role of the media in shaping public opinion, representations of Islam in the Arab world have tended to reinforce the association of Muslims and Arabs with violence and terror, as is evident in the daily stream of war reporting from the region, which is only occasionally balanced by human interest stories about Muslims in the US. So when you turn on the TV or when you listen to the news in the United States or read the newspaper, when there's reporting about Muslims, it's almost always about violence. It's very rarely about the way that Muslims have played a role in finding treatments for COVID, or coming up with tests for COVID, or working in public health in the United States as doctors. There's many Muslims who are doctors. There's many Muslims in labs. That rarely comes up as a story. I mean, occasionally it does happen, but even in Flint, where Dr. Atiyah was involved in exposing the lead poisoning that was caused in the water, very rarely does the media make much of the fact that she's of Middle Eastern descent and is a Muslim. It's just not really part of the story. And so, so here we have these kinds of one-sided presentations. Under such conditions, the visible presence of Muslims and Arabs in public life, the presence of Muslims or Muslim presence in the media has generated a range of responses from sympathetic portrayals in contemporary US mediascape to an unrestrained anti-Muslim bigotry, to anti-Islamophobia political awareness initiative. So you have this range. So on one hand, it's like sympathetic. Oh, we want to have our Muslims. We need our Muslims on TV. You know, we got to have Muslim representation. We got to have Muslim presence. And then you also have anti-Muslim feelings. It's like, why are those Muslims on TV? To anti-Islamophobia campaigns that are public campaigns to denounce Islamophobia. So in connection with this last point, the American Civil Liberties Union, I don't know if I have a slide for this. I don't, I'm sorry. The American Civil Liberties Union launched the Protecting the Religious Freedom of Muslims project, Protecting the Religious Freedom of Muslims project. That's the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. So the project suggests that a significant threat to US political life does not come from American Muslims, but rather from the anti-Muslim assault, which undermines the foundations of US political culture, religious freedom. Religious freedom is one of America's most fundamental liberties and a central principle upon which our nation was founded. I'm quoting from the American Civil Liberties Union statement. The online overview of Protecting the Religious Freedom of Muslims explains the motivation behind the project, which documents hundreds of cases of civil rights violations. And I'm quoting again. Muslim communities in the US have faced a disturbing wave of bigotry and outright hostility from religiously motivated discrimination and attacks on existing and proposed Islamic centers to misguided congressional hearings. Muslims in America are being unfairly targeted simply for exercising their basic constitutional right to religious liberty. So this is the Protecting Religious Freedom document published by the American Civil Liberties Union. The advocacy efforts of the ACLU and other organizations on behalf of Muslim Americans, sometimes in collaboration with the Council on American Islamic Relations, that's sometimes called CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, or the Arab American Institute, and Muslim Public Affairs Council. So these are all civic engagement organizations established by Muslims and Arabs to advocate for our rights in the United States and to document racism, bigotry, and abuse that we face simply because of who we are in this country. So MPAC, which is the Muslim Public Affairs Council, is one of the more active. So working from distinct political positions, but with a shared commitment to challenging Islamophobia and securing a space for Muslim, Arabs, and other Middle Easterners within US public life. This loose alignment of groups constitutes a counter trend to the anti-Muslim and anti-Arab organization. So what I'm trying to say is that CARE, MPAC, ADC, and even the ACLU is the flip side of those Islamophobic anti-Arab groups like the Horowitz Center and Gaffney and the like. For instance, while the ACLU takes up a wide variety of issues, from religious freedom to reproductive freedom, MPAC's mission is specifically focused on establishing a vibrant Muslim American community that will enrich American society through promoting the Islamic values of mercy, justice, peace, human dignity, freedom, and equality for all. So that's the vision of MPAC. That's what their vision statement is if you go to their webpage. So MPAC advocates Muslim American involvement in US public life through a strategy of Americanization, which articulates Muslim religious difference with liberal democratic ideals and a US nationalist ethos. I'm pretty sure I have a slide here. Okay, so there's the ACLU, protecting the religious freedom of Muslims. Okay, so this is the Muslim Public Affairs Council, MPAC. Okay, so nowhere is this more evident than in MPAC's Safe Space Initiative, tools for developing healthy communities, which makes available to leaders of mosques and Islamic centers a toolkit to address any signs of violent extremism. So this Safe Spaces Initiative is like a paper that is given to imams in mosques or directors of Islamic centers so that they can, it's given by Muslims to other Muslims so that they can identify Muslims who might be a problem, who might be involved in something illegal against the United States. So even though MPAC's approach is distinct from law enforcement, like the police, law enforcement, the Safe Spaces Initiative opposes the usage of terms like Islamic extremism or jihadism. The toolkit is motivated in the first place by the presumed presence on the fringe of violent extremism within mosque communities. In other words, I mean, I'm not saying this isn't the case, but the assumption is that something needs to be done in all the mosques around the country to make sure that there isn't any violent extremism, because there might be, because they're mosques. It's strange. Like, it's like, oh, because they're mosques, there might be, like, nobody would say, well, oh, there's churches. Oh, there might be violent extremism there, even though many Christians commit mass murder in the United States. So, but because it's, so this is Muslims who even sort of have bought in a little bit to this idea. MPAC's focus on mosques is not analogous to the FBI's so-called mosque outreach program. So the FBI had a mosque outreach program, which was a covert operation where they enlisted Muslims in mosques to spy on other Muslims. They actually did this. They paid people, and people took money from the FBI to go to mosques and spy on people, and in some cases, even encourage them to do things to see if they could be tempted to engage in violent acts, usually young people, usually young men. But the initiative, so what I'm saying is MPAC is different from the FBI. The Safe Spaces is different from the FBI's mosque outreach program. And it's not like the NYPD, the New York Police Department, they had a mosque surveillance program. They did the same thing, covert surveillance. It was illegal, but they did it. But MPAC's initiative is premised on the idea that American mosques are sites of extremist recruitment or organizing. But there's little significant evidence to support the assertion. Like there's very little evidence that mosques are hotbeds of extremism now or previously. Conversely, there are numerous documented cases in which mosques are in fact the targets of anti-Muslim hate crimes. Mosques are being attacked. They're not, people from mosques aren't attacking America. There are Americans that are attacking mosques. Existing mosques have been vandalized, and the construction of new mosques has catalyzed malicious anti-Muslim protests. Catherine Pratt Ewing sees the controversies surrounding new mosque construction as actually a sign that Muslims are creating a permanent place for themselves in many areas of the United States. If you build a mosque, you have a community, that means you're staying there. And not only that, you're welcoming others to come there and be Muslim. If you have a mosque, it's not going anywhere. So this is why, for some Americans, this is extremely threatening. In effect, mosques are among the most visible forms of Muslim presence in the US and constitute historically the single most significant indicator of an enduring Muslim presence in the United States. Rather than retreat from public view or totally assimilate to an acculturated secularism. So Muslims, I mean, many Muslims just become American. They stop practicing their religion. They don't say they're not Muslim, but they intermarry with non-Muslims and they just become American over time, you know, 1 generation, 2 generations, that kind of thing. So, so even though they might have some attachments to being Muslim, they don't raise their children as Muslims, they don't go to the mosque, they don't have community, that kind of thing. So you could do that, right? You can assimilate to an acculturated secularism. Every Muslim in the United States could do that. Just give up being a Muslim. But many Muslim Americans have responded through cultural projects that stage Muslimness not as the antithesis of Americanness or as an assertion of piety, but rather as a critique of the particular forms of hatred and violence that characterize the war on terror, in particular, and racism and sexism more generally. So what I'm trying to say here is that people like Mustafa Bayoumi here, he says, I'm a Muslim. I would like to report a crazy man threatening a woman on the stage in Missouri. Here he was referring to Donald Trump's debate with Hillary Clinton. So, you know, going back. And so the idea is that, like, you know, he's asserting his Muslim stuff in this tweet, and it got a lot of circulation because there were a lot of anti-Trump people and a lot of pro-Hillary people. So all the people who liked Hillary were on his side. So what Mustafa's doing here, Mustafa wrote an important book called How Does It Feel to Be a Problem? Being Muslim in America. How does it feel to be a problem? And so if you're interested in following up on Mustafa, there's the title to his book. So this idea that what they're doing by asserting their Muslimness is not simply countering Islamophobia, not simply practicing their religion, but also criticizing, engaging with what's going on in political life in the United States. So wearing a hijab or building a mosque is a sign of piety, is a sign of devotion to Islam, but it's more than that. It's more than that politically. It has to be. So performances of the hijabi monologues, oops, let me go back to that. Performances of the hijabi monologues, tracks of the hip hop artist Omar Effendim, the music of the Taqwa Corps band or the Kominas, and the videos of Mipsters. Are you familiar with Mipsters, the young women who were like hijabi hipsters, Muslim hipsters, constitute noteworthy examples of self-defining reaffirmations of Muslimness against a backdrop of public hostility that I've outlined above. But the forms of Muslimness that have taken shape in these cultural projects also challenge our understandings of Islam or specifically ethnic belonging. This isn't just mainstream conventional or conservative Islam. These are challenging demonstrations of Muslimness in public life that take American forms of expression and make them Muslim. So the Muslim American artists and cultural projects I mentioned above, the Hijabi monologues or Omar Effendi, or the Kominas or Mipsters, are part of a much larger group of Muslims in the US, which includes stand-up comedians, filmmakers, writers, visual artists, media personalities, and fashion designers engaged in self-fashioning that is more than a response to the public animosity. These performances redefine the very notion of Muslimness within a political environment conditioned by hostile discourses of the mainstream media and the socio-cultural limitations of mosque-going communities. Let me read that again. The hostile discourses, it's somewhere in between the hostile discourses of the mainstream media and the socio-cultural limitations of mosque-going communities. So the emancipatory and expressive opportunities are associated with these cultural movements for Muslims today. So I'll finish there. And what I'm trying to say at the end is that these groups, this Muslim presence, is challenging in both directions. It challenges the racist, but it also challenges a conventional notion of Muslimness. And I can show you some examples if you want, but let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salah Hassan. I hear some background noises. I wonder if it's just on my end. Okay, now there's, thank you so much for this very engaging talk. I hope the audience can follow up with your questions. I think we have, Dr. Dion Ginanto, can you confirm we have about 10-15 minutes for question and answers? Is that okay amount of time?
Yes.
Okay, so I'd like to open the question and answer, and I don't quite see any questions yet on the chat.
Prof. So ID is going to ask questions.
Yes, so I see Prof. Suaidi's hand. Yes, well, welcome. Pak Rektor, silakan.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Salah Hassan, for that very interesting and also very deep, comprehensive presentations, and also it will help my colleague here understand the way how we present our research or our findings for this particular webinar. And I myself have a question. If I look at like until 15 years ago, in America, whenever there was a competition between Democrats and Republican competing for the presidency, there was a 5-year, once in a 5-year, what I can call that a competition between Democrat and Republican by using issues relating to Islam in order to win the votes in domestic politics. But when Barack Obama won the election, there was and still is change, and for me it's very good sign for the way how Americans look at Islam and other religions in the United States. And what I can see that since the last 15 years, there is a good sign for this. And my question, whether what American,
Prof. Swaidi, are you still with us?
I think he froze. He froze on my end.
Yeah, he's also, it looks like he's in transit. Prof. Swaidi,
Yeah.
are you able to hear us?
And now he
Hopefully
muted.
he'll be able to come back online and finish the question. I think he was in the verge of asking the question. I think we
see coming in. So sorry for that. So there is a my question: whether American researchers see that the competition between Republican and Democrats also contributes to the way how Americans look at Islam, and not also Islam, but I think also other political international issues like what happened in South and North Korea. What do you think about that? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean the relationship between so U.S. electoral politics and foreign policy are is always an issue, and as are these domestic issues about, like, you know, immigration, which is a kind of a foreign policy issue. But what I'm saying is that we can see that in the lead up to the 2016 election, and even, you know, in the more recent election of Biden, that Americans don't know what to do with the relationship to Muslims, and they don't really know what to do with foreign policy in the Middle East. And like American politicians, there's no coherence. In other words, it's not like things line up like these are our allies and it all makes sense. So for example, you know, I mean, everybody knows that most of the hijackers in 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. So, but Saudi Arabia, Donald Trump went to Saudi Arabia and he met with the king, and he's, you know, he was allied with Saudi Arabia and some of the other wealthy Gulf countries. But these countries are Muslim countries. I mean, and they're monarchies, so they're not democratic. They don't represent U.S. values in any way. So there's no coherence. In other words, it's like Muslims are okay when there are strategic allies, like the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, the Mujahideen were they were freedom fighters. So militant Muslims, when they're fighting on the side of the US, or militant or autocratic and human rights abusers that are Muslims, they're okay when they're our friends. They're not okay when we decide that they're, but who are the friends and who are not the friends has nothing to do with who's Muslim and who's not Muslim. It's strategic, it's geopolitical. And that's why I say that at the center of this, and we see this with the Horowitz poster, at the center of much of this in the last, so when before the Iranian Revolution, and then before the rise, before 1990, before the end of the Cold War, there was very little anti-Muslim propaganda in the United States. It was mostly anti-Arab and mostly anti-PLO. I mean, you had anti-Iranian propaganda, but most of it was like the Arabs were the terrorists because the PLO and Libya and, you know, the civil war in Lebanon, it was like these Arabs were the terrorists. And it was Arab nationalism that was the problem. That Arab nationalism in alliance with the Soviet Union was, you know, hijacking these airplanes and doing the Munich Olympics and all of this, right? Like, so this idea that and what motivated Arab nationalism was, you know, the revolution against imperialism, and Israel was a form of imperialism. So this is the way that This is the way it worked out. And whether you believe that or not, this is kind of the way that the rhetoric or the discourse and the representation worked. But at the end of the Cold War, when there was no more Soviet Union and all those Arab nationalist regimes were no longer had anybody to support them, like this was true for Saddam Hussein and for Syria and Gaddafi and the PLO and then some of the leftist groups in Lebanon. Now they had to find another way to organize. And so they couldn't organize, they weren't very effective. These were leftist groups, leftist secular Arab nationalist groups. So what took their place in many cases were these new Muslim groups like Hamas or Hezbollah in Palestine and Lebanon, or the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Al-Nahda in Tunisia. And these groups that in Iraq you had the Sadr, the Sadr brigades and the Sadrists. They were Shia, but still, I mean, it was like these religiously based groups that were very popular and did things for people and defended them and protected them, because in many ways these communities were under attack, often under attack. And so, and they were under attack by their own governments who were committing human rights abuse. So Saddam Hussein was, of course, hostile to the Shia religious community, Hamas, of course, was under attack by Israel. The Muslim Brotherhood was under attack by Mubarak. So all of this before the Arab Spring. So these Muslim groups were very active in their local environments, doing things to help people, to protect people. Sometimes, through the mosques, they would do charity, but they were also fighters. They were also engaged with, they had guns and they had propaganda, and social media, and these kinds of things. So they were local political groups that filled a vacuum. And we might not like some aspects of them, but they did fill a vacuum. And now this became the new target and especially after 9/11, it became very clear that anti-Muslim group, like anti-Muslim movement in the United States, could capitalize and use 9/11 very effectively. But what's interesting and what I'm trying to trace here is that even though, so anti-Muslim sentiment went up really high right after 9/11, then it came back down and Obama was elected. Like, nobody would expect that a guy named Barack Hussein Obama, Saddam Hussein Obama would get elected. And whether or not, whatever people think about he's not a Muslim. He's Christian. He goes to church. He's not a Muslim. But his father was a Muslim. And so, so he has some connection, of course. And the idea is that, who would have expected after 9/11 that a guy named Barack Hussein Obama would be elected? So that's what I'm talking about, is Muslim presence. So even if he's not a Muslim, there's a kind of Muslim presence through Obama in the United States. And so the anti-Muslim sentiment went down. But then after a few years of Obama, it started to go up again. I can't quite explain it, but I think what it was linked to was anti-Obama movement mobilizing. They were like, well, how are we going to bring this black guy down? We can't have a black guy as president with the middle name Hussein, his middle name is Hussein. We can't have this guy. So they started attacking him. And and Obama came in, he was not critical of Israel, but he didn't have a good relationship with Israel during the 8 years. And so attacking Obama and defending Israel and attacking Muslims, this all kind of got mushed together in that period. And I mean, I'm not saying this is not a conspiracy or anything. I mean, it's just, you can see it. It's like in black and white. This it's like in the open. There's no secret to it. Israel is good. These Muslims are bad. Obama is bad because he's like influenced by these Muslims. And that's very effective. So it's during the Obama period that the anti-Muslim sentiment goes up, 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 up. And then Trump capitalizes on that. It's quite remarkable. And at the same time that that's happening, more and more Muslims are present and have recognition and are in movies, are doing all these things, are stars. Now on the news all the time, on MSNBC, I think there's at least 3 people with Muslim names on MSNBC, maybe 4, who do reporting and have their own shows. So it's amazing.
Dr. Hassan.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Dr. Swati, thank you so much. I'm wondering, I know we're almost out of time, but I saw just one more person who had a question. But Mufdil, if you're still here, I wanted to kind of give it the opportunity for one more question before we conclude.
Okay, thank you, Mbak
Thank
Bella.
you.
Thank you. My name is Mufdil. I am a lecturer here in the Department of Religious Studies in Sultan Taha Saifuddin Jambi. I'm so interesting. I'm on your explanation, Pak Saleh Hassan. You have already explained the complexities of the Islamophobia in America, if this still exists. You also explain about the many factors that we cannot, until we cannot found that there is a religious factor only who has contribute to the attitudes against Islam that we said commonly known as Islamophobia, but also many factors, including internal factor like immigrants, the increasing number of immigrants from Muslim from Middle East, for example, and also internal policy that you have explained a little bit. But my question is about the what do you think that the common the recent development of the study about the Islam in United States after maybe after Anwar Said, for example, we have many scholars like Talal Asad or also Sabah Mahmud, and also you have given a good explanation about Islam to many people in America. For example, is it does it influence the attitudes or the perception or the understanding of the people, especially non-Islam, non-Muslim in America? I think that is my first question. And the second question is about that you mentioned about the building mosque and also the symbol of piety in the public sphere is allowed in America because in term of the religious freedoms. This portrait is also contribute for the kind of the new form of the piety from American society, also contribute to the feeling threatened by many people of America today. How far is this Islamic piety shown in public? I think I have two questions. The first one is about the representation of academia about the study of Islam can contribute to the people perception, and also the Islamic piety shown in public. Is it threatened? Is it threatened for people in America or not? Thank you, Pak Saleh Hassan. Thank you so much.
I didn't hear the last part of it. Is it what? Is it threatened?
Yeah, threatened.
Yes.
You mentioned
okay.
the increasing populism, Islamic populism. For example, many people, you said that they start to building a mosque, also represents their piety in the public. Is it threatened for Muslim for people in America?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that many Americans feel, a lot of sympathy for Muslims and are interested in learning about Islam. In fact, there's a remarkable rate of conversion to Islam among Americans. Like now, like you wonder, like why are white American women converting and becoming Muslims? I mean, it's interesting. Like many, it's not because they're marrying Muslim men. They convert and then they go look for a Muslim husband. It's not, you know, it's interesting. So there is a threat, but there's also like this threat that is like Islam has some appeal. Many Americans find Islam very appealing. And I mean, it's not the majority, but so this is the paradox as I'm trying to get at. It's like the Muslim presence is not really straightforward. It's like, you know, what they find is that most Americans, if they know a Muslim, their attitudes towards Islam change. If they have a friend who's a Muslim or a neighbor who's a Muslim, or they work with somebody who's a Muslim, they don't feel the same way that they did before when they didn't know a Muslim. You know, so there is a threat for people who are anti-Muslim, because obviously Islam has something that attracts people. There's something there that makes people want to know more about Islam and maybe even become Muslim. So I don't know what that is. I was raised in a Muslim family, so I have don't have that experience, but I do know it from personal experience. So on the other hand, it makes no sense because Muslims are threatened all the time. They're attacked, they're abused, they're discriminated against, they're subject to violence. Sometimes they're killed. Sometimes people who aren't even Muslim are killed because people think they're Muslim, like Sikhs or Arabs who are Christian, but people think because they hear them speaking Arabic, they're Muslims. So there's this guy in Oklahoma, he was shot by his neighbor because he thought they were Muslims. He's like his neighbor. He just heard these Arabs. They were Christian from Lebanon. And he got mad because he had like some kind of rage where he got mad because the neighbors were parking their cars in front of his house. So he went and told them to stop parking their cars in front. And they were like, we can park our car in front of your house. It's the street. It's just the public street. You can't tell people where to park on the street. The guy went home, got his gun and shot him. The boy, he was like 27, 28 years old. He was living with his mother and father. He had previously attacked the mother with his car, tried to smash her car with his car. I mean, this kind of craziness. There's like not even Muslims, but they think they're Muslims. So Muslims in the United States are, the category of Muslim is I'm going to quote the famous Indian Muslim American comedian Azhar Usman. He made a series called Allah Made Me Funny. He's a stand-up comedian from Chicago. He was a lawyer, became a stand-up comedian, Azhar Usman. And so he says Muslims are, the category of Muslim in the United States is over-inclusive because it includes people who are not Muslims. Many people who are not Muslims, people think are Muslims because they speak Arabic. They're like, oh, they must be Muslims. Or they wear a turban and they're like, oh, they must be Muslims. Or they wear a certain kind of clothes, or they have a beard or something, they must be Muslims. They don't know anything. And so they attack these people who aren't even Muslim. They're like, I'm not even Muslim. Why are you attacking me? But it's also under-inclusive because nobody ever thinks of, like, part of the reason why Barack Obama can get elected, even if people say, well, yeah, he's got a Muslim father, doesn't matter, is because he's Black. He can get elected because most people don't think that Black people are Muslims. But the largest group of Muslims in the United States is African-American Muslims. There are about 40% of the Muslims in the United States are African-American. It's not Arabs, it's not Indians, it's not Pakistanis, it's not Indonesians, it's not Africans from North Africa. It's African-Americans, it's Americans who are Muslim. They're Americans, they didn't immigrate here. They didn't come from anywhere. They were brought here, enslaved, and they're the descendants of slaves, and they're Muslims. So usually people don't think of that when they think about American Muslims, but they think of immigrants, but it's actually, almost 40, maybe more than 40% now of Muslims in the United States are Black. So it's interesting, like the threat that Muslims live with and the threat that the threats that they face are not equal to the threats that they pose. They do not pose threats. But if you're a white American Christian, you'd be worried if your daughter came home one day and said, I'm changing my name to Aisha and I'm going to start wearing hijab. And that's happening. That's happening in this country. So it's interesting. And this is the Muslim presence that I'm talking about as a paradox. At a time when you would think that people would run away from being Muslim, more and more they're affirming that they're Muslim.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan, and thank you for the question, Dr. Mufdil Duhri. I think that this has been such a fascinating conversation, and I do, because we are running out of time, I think I'm kind of towards concluding our exchange here, but I do wonder if I'm allowed to sort of offer a little bit of more ask for more advice from you, Dr. Salah Hassan, in terms of, having heard all this for our Indonesian colleagues who are in this, we are the biggest Muslim country in the world in terms of population, and we are, our colleagues, our esteemed colleagues in this Win Jambi, they're in the Islamic State University. How do we sort of impart this notion of, in terms of hope, to sort of together build awareness, sort of global awareness, among sort of communities and interfaith communities globally, especially in the US, and also, sort of communities in the US that are sort of victimized by these political rhetorics and the political plays of sort of, people like the Horowitz group and Gaffney, who are trying to use, sort of these issues, anti-Muslim sentiment, sort of really to their end, to their political end. But how do we sort of contribute to the discourse to sort of combat on the one hand, misinformation, further division, but also, for division in terms of anti-Western, anti-American sort of sentiments that, may be on the rise, right? In sort of like populations in Asia. Like, how do we contribute in productive ways through US-Indonesia exchanges and partnerships at the academic, level of activities, but it's just sort of like as our global civic engagement in general to sort of, respond respond in graceful ways to, I think, your work and what you're sharing with us.
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. I don't know that I have a very good answer. I think, I think we're we have to be optimistic about, what we can do. We have to be optimistic about what we can do together for us to support each other. That's where I think you began with the question of hope. And I think that that's where it really has to happen. And so I never give up on the people that can hear me, that listen and believe, that we can change the world and make it better. The people I give up on are the ones who, are sowing evil. They're out there, they're doing this for political ends, and it's very effective and it's frightening. And we see things being twisted all the time, like who we are and what we believe and these kinds of things. But for me, because I have, friends and community and intellectual exchanges with people, and I work with lots of people in Africa, in the Middle East, and Asia, and Latin America as well. And so I speak Spanish and French, so I have connections across and of course with Arabic. So I mean, I think that there's those connections and what we can do together. And I think that Jambi has like a really fascinating commitment to, Muslimness within its core, but also education in a broad sense, one that isn't just driven by Islam. And so these are the kinds of things we want to encourage. I think we want to encourage them, in the Muslim majority countries, but we also want to encourage them among our Muslim brothers and sisters in North America. Is this idea of a kind of openness to learning and understanding and finding ways to negotiate sometimes very difficult issues of where our beliefs don't always line up with other people's values, but we have to respect them. We have to respect those other values, and we have to respect that even among ourselves, even among Muslims, there are different values. And so many of the problems we face, in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, it's like Muslims killing Muslims. It's terrible. It's terrible, these wars. So, we have to deal with that as well. And we have to find, so of course, we want these exchanges of ideas and words and images and to grow, as opposed to the violent exchanges that we see on, either in those countries that are war torn or the hostility that sometimes we face. So my optimism, and I believe this, this idea of optimism of the will, that what we can do things. We can never stop doing things just because it looks hopeless, So that's where I stand. But we still have to criticize. We still have to be able to critique, and we still have to be able to analyze and recognize these contradictions sometimes in ourselves.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salah
Thank you.
Hassan. Thank you for the wonderful, wonderful presentation, all these responses, and thank you for all the questions to the audience. And I think Dr. Dion Ginanto will agree with me. This is sort of like definitely a goal of these virtual exchanges between faculty members at UNJMB and MSU, not just for academic exchanges and intellectual sort of engagement and discourse building, but really just cross-cultural understanding that's, and understanding the nuances of experiences, differing experiences because of our context. So I thank you for the opportunity for being able to moderate this event today, and I'm going to return it back to Dr. Dion Ginanto. Thank you so much. You can conclude the event.
Well, yes, once again, thank you so much, Dr. Salah Hassan, for a wonderful opportunity, wonderful slides, and we learned a lot. And I believe there are so many questions, but because of time, and maybe perhaps we can do, like more session in the future.
Yeah, sure. I'd happy to.
And
just
also
informal. I can just do an informal thing.
That's correct.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Just let me know.
Correct, true. And also, and regarding our visiting lecturer in your classroom, and maybe we can have a discussion more in our email. I believe
Yes.
Dr. Suaidi is ready to be
Excellent.
In November. So
well, I won't have 80 people. I'm sorry, because I have a small class. But we'll try and bring.
Yeah,
we'll try and bring more through. Muhammad is usually very good at, and Bella at publicizing these events. So we'll make it open.
Yeah,
so
I'll be there.
People...
That's sure. Okay. Before I close, I just want to remind everybody that the link for e-certificate is there. So we will send the certificate through email. And also, I would like to remind everyone that we are going to have our international conference, and we will invite Dr. Muhammad Khalil as a keynote speakers, and also Dr. Rafaela Slit. He was MSU faculty member as well. And so we are so excited about this. And for our November, for our international webinar number 3, it's going to be in November 8th. And the topic will be Islam and the Faith of Others. So these are all important topics and very interesting. So for all of you we really encourage you to re-attend our November session. Okay, so once again, thank you so much, Dr. Bella Tirtawalio. Thank you so much, Dr. Salah Hassan. I know it's already late at night in East Lansing, and I know it's beautiful in East Lansing with the colorful trees and stuff. So please say hi to MSU Spartans from us. Win Jambi. All right. Thank you so much. And wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning.
Thank you so much. It's really, I really enjoyed this, and I wish we had more time. And please don't hesitate to contact me, Dion, anytime.
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Thank you so much from Salah.
Thank you, Salah. Good to see you. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night. Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. Selamat pagi.
Terima kasih Bapak Ibu semua, Prof. Adrianus Katib, Bapak dosen. Bye-bye. Oh ya Bapak Ibu, jangan lupa untuk mengisi daftar hadir karena sertifikatnya akan dikirim melalui email. Mungkin yang belum ini akan saya kopikan lagi di chat. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Dion.
Thank you, Mr. Doni.
Pak Dion tadi kalau nggak salah November 9 ya jadi.
November 9.
Dr. Muhammad Khalil.
Ya, untuk Muhammad Khalil November 9 di Indonesia.
Ya, November 9 di Indonesia ya.
Ya, November 9 di Indonesia dan November 8 di
malam di saya.
Amerika. Yes, yes. Okay. Terima kasih banyak Mbak Bella, sehat.
Terima kasih banyak, Yon.
Okay.
Saya pamit dulu. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu sekalian.
Mbak Bella, silakan Mbak Bella. Saya ingin memastikan bahwa semuanya sudah mengisi absen karena tadi 80-an lebih, tetapi yang absen baru 60-an. Nanti nggak dapat sertifikat. Makasih ya Mbak Bella ya.
Thank you ya.
Thank you. Ya, silakan Bapak Ibu untuk yang belum mengisi absensi, ini adalah untuk link sertifikat. Jadi sertifikatnya langsung dikirim dan saya tadi sudah coba mengisi data nama saya dan email dan sertifikatnya langsung terkirim ke email. Jadi bagi Bapak Ibu yang belum mengisi link sertifikat untuk segera mengisinya dan Bapak Ibu mudah-mudahan dapat bergabung kembali di November diskusi webinar ketiga dan juga di International Conference karena International Conference nanti akan gratis dan juga akan mendapatkan sertifikat konferensi internasional yang ditandatangani oleh UIN Jakarta dan UIN Jambi karena ini kerjasama UIN Jakarta dan UIN Jambi. Demikian Bapak Ibu ya. Ya.
Kirim lagi linknya, saya belum ambil itu Pak.
Oke, linknya saya kirim lagi ya Bapak, Ibu. Ini dia, linknya ada di chat bit.ly MSU UIN 2. Baik Bapak Ibu, terima kasih. Jika semuanya sudah mengisi absensi, maka akan kami tutup Zoom-nya. Sudah ya Bapak Ibu ya, sudah semua dapat linknya. Demikian. Wallahul muwaffiq ila aqwamit thoriq. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.